from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
What is inside this vial could kill you almost instantly. In fact, this much would kill you and I if we split it. It's odorless, tasteless, and it's currently being disguised as nearly any drug you can buy off the street. This is fentanyl.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 26th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, fentanyl in Nebraska. We have two guests joining us to talk more about it. The first is Dr. Alona Balasanova, an associate professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in the Department of Psychiatry. She is joining us via Zoom. And here in the studio, we have Lieutenant Eric Kaufman. Lieutenant Kaufman is with the Nebraska State Patrol. Thank you so much for sharing your time today. We appreciate it and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Kathy.
You bet. Dr. Balasanova, I want to start with you and the number of deaths caused by fentanyl in 2021.
Yes, absolutely. So looking at the big picture, nationally, there were 106,000 deaths of overdose deaths. And of those, about 80,000 involved opioids. Now, of those 80,000 involving opioids, 65,000 were related to fentanyl. So really the great majority of the overdose deaths that were attributable to opioids were due to fentanyl.
Okay. And we are going to talk about the why behind the reason for the increase in all of this. But before we do that, explain to our viewers, please, what is fentanyl?
Yeah, so fentanyl is an opioid. It is much stronger opioid than the usual players. It is 50 times more potent than heroin, 100 times more potent than morphine. And really there are two kinds of fentanyl. There's the licit and the illicit. So the illicit is the pharmaceutical fentanyl that was developed way back when in order to help treat pain in cancer patients. And that is developed and regulated by the FDA and is appropriate for use when prescribed by a provider. And then there's the illicit fentanyl, which is actually developed typically by, drug cartels who develop it for the express purpose of trafficking and of using it on the black market.
Okay, thank you. So Lieutenant Kaufman, she touched on it. So exactly where is this illicit fentanyl coming from?
According to our casework that we've done and a lot of the intelligence that we have gained, it appears that most of this fentanyl is being manufactured in Mexico and China.
And how then does it get into our country?
That's a great question. And really, it's any mode of transportation that you can think of, any port of entry that you can think of. It can be via vehicle, it could be via rail, it could be via ship, via airplane, any mode of transportation that you could possibly conceive. And with fentanyl, it's potent in such a small amount that it can even be carried on a person. So it could be in a backpack, it could be in a bag, it could be in a person's pocket, and still in a quantity that could be deadly.
Unfortunately, Nebraska not immune from all of this. In fact, in 2018, there was a record-breaking bust. Talk to us about that as we're putting up some photos for our viewers.
Yeah, this is from a semi-truck and trailer in central Nebraska. May of 2018, a trooper located this contraband during the course of a traffic stop. 118 pounds of fentanyl. At the time, I believe was the largest seizure in the United States. And backing up just 9 months prior to that, investigators in my office located nearly 40 pounds of fentanyl, which at the time was the third largest seizure of fentanyl. Fast forward to today, 5 years later, while both significant amounts of seizures, those are nowhere near the top of the list across the country. So what that means to the average citizen is there's an awful lot of fentanyl going through the country.
Right, and it hasn't slowed down here. There was another bust earlier this year. We're going to put up another photo for our viewers. And as we're doing that, I'd be interested, first of all, how you said a routine traffic stop. How is it that you are detecting that this could be a possibility? And then you actually find something like this packaged much differently than what we saw before, right, Lieutenant?
Yes, that's correct. So, one thing about traffic stops, we often refer to those as routine traffic stops. However, there truly is nothing routine about any traffic stop. It may be for a minor traffic violation that we're making that stop. It may be for something that normally would not even result in a citation. However, once the officer gets to the vehicle, you truly never know what you're going to encounter. It may result in a simple warning or a citation. It could result in an arrest. It could result in a drug seizure, a weapon seizure. It could result in the arrest of a homicide suspect. You truly do not know what's going to happen once you make contact with the occupants of that vehicle.
I know in certain cases when you do find something, it's suspected until you're able to prove otherwise, right?
That's correct.
How are you proving that then? You take something like we just saw, you take it where, and then what happens?
There are field tests that can be conducted either on the side of the road or back at a patrol office, and then those drugs are sent into the lab so that their contents can be confirmed. Okay.
When we talk about fentanyl, especially illicit fentanyl, what are we talking in terms of the cost?
It varies. You know, supply and demand in the drug world is very much the same as it is in the real world. Typically in the Omaha area now, it may be give or take $20 per pill, but that does fluctuate pretty substantially. We've had investigators that have purchased fentanyl for less. We've had investigators that have purchased it for more. So there truly is a fluctuation depending upon the supply of the drug and the demand from the public.
Okay. Lieutenant, how is this being sold?
Typically, we see it either in powder or in pill form. The danger there is that it may look the same as any other powder that may be sold on the street, such as cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin. In pill form, it may be pressed into a counterfeit pill. It could look like anything from an oxycodone, a Xanax, anything of that nature. And that is where the true danger lies. When we talk about how one pill can kill, that is very true in this case. These pills that are manufactured in a counterfeit manner, there's no science that goes into it. There's no quality control. These pills are being pressed and put out on the street, and no one knows what's truly inside of them. There may be a lethal dose inside that pill. There may be a dose that's not lethal inside that pill. And when you get to the next pill, it could be completely different. Unless you know the true origin of that pill, for example, from your pharmacist, there's really no way to know what's in that pill.
Wow. Dr. Balasanova, we're going to bring you back into the discussion now. Talk with our viewers about what the exposure to this looks like. I mean, really, especially considering what Lieutenant just said, right? You just don't know. So if we see someone, what does that look like in order for us to be able to move forward and try to help with that?
Well, I'm so glad the lieutenant mentioned that fentanyl is making its way into all substances on the black market. So, you know, we see it in cocaine, we see it in counterfeit benzodiazepine pills, we're seeing it in methamphetamine. And you will have individuals who accidentally overdose on opioids, on fentanyl, without ever knowing they ingested it to begin with. I've taken care of these patients in the hospital, and it's terrifying for them because they had no idea what happened. And what happens with fentanyl overdose or exposure to fentanyl that is potentially lethal is that it really decreases your drive to breathe. So that part of your brain that tells you to breathe, it shuts that part of the brain off. And so then before you know it, you're not breathing.
Are you able, I mean, for the cases that you're aware of, if that is what's happening, are they able to communicate at all what's going on?
Typically, they become unconscious. So even if they are still breathing somewhat, they become unconscious at that point. And so they're not able to tell you what's going on. Usually, these individuals are found down, and we're not sure exactly what the cause was, and then later find out that it was fentanyl.
All right, I know, especially from where you're sitting, honestly, from where we're all sitting, prevention is key here, and I know you really want to talk about that today, Doctor. Open up the conversation, A, about the importance of prevention, and B, get this conversation started for us.
Absolutely, and as a clinician, you know, prevention and treatment is what I do, and so it's very near and dear to my heart. So primary prevention, that has to really begin with our youngsters, right? Having educational presentations in schools, making sure that people are aware of what this is. because you never know that pill that somebody gives to you at a party, it could be fentanyl and you simply don't know, and it's not worth taking that risk. Also, something very important for secondary prevention and overdose prevention is naloxone or Narcan. So this is an antidote, an opioid reversal agent that can be sprayed in the nose just by lay people. Law enforcement frequently will do it as well. And if somebody had an opioid overdose, then it will bring them back. It'll wake them up very suddenly. It doesn't last very long, just long enough to call EMS or call 911, but it will wake them up suddenly. And if they did not have an opioid overdose, it does not harm them in any way. It's as though you did not administer anything. Now, Nebraska has really taken great strides to increase access to this life-saving drug, naloxone. So we have a standing order, meaning that our Department of Health and Human Services has allowed for pharmacies to give out this medication. You can purchase it at pharmacies without a prescription because of the standing order. We also have a number of pharmacies that offer it for free for individuals who maybe are not able to pay. And there's a list available on the DHHS website showing all across the state, in every county of the state, there are pharmacies that will offer it for free. And so it's very important that people know that. Of course, you can also get it with a prescription by a doctor or your healthcare provider. But naloxone is something that the U.S. Surgeon General and those of us in the field really encourage folks to carry, to have on them. It's basically a fire extinguisher. That's how I like to think about it. It's a fire extinguisher that you want to have in your house. You never want to have to use it, of course, but if you have a fire, aren't you glad that you had that fire extinguisher? That's how I like to look at it.
I want to go back to something you said about the schools, and the importance of getting into the schools. First of all, are you getting into them pretty easily? And then I guess I would be curious from that perspective, what are the students asking about? So, the individual gets done with a presentation and the hands start to go in the air. What are some of those most commonly asked questions from a teenager's perspective?
Yeah, those are excellent questions. Now, I have not personally gone into schools, although some of my colleagues have that do more of that community work. I think students are curious. Teenagers are curious, right, in general, and a little bit rebellious, and that's part of being a teenager. And so I think a lot of it revolves around this curiosity and, maybe you're telling me not to do something, and that makes me really want to do it a little bit more. And so it's important that every family, every teacher be able to provide a solid, unified message about the dangers of fentanyl. Because if they're seeing it everywhere from their healthcare providers, from their families, from their schools, I do think that that message will sink in. And I do think that people will take it to heart.
Doctor, this is not obviously an easy conversation for people to be having. So if there are parents who are watching at home and they're concerned and really want to delve a little bit more into their child's or their neighbors or what have you, just to make sure that things are as okay as they can be, how do you start that conversation?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. It is a very awkward, challenging conversation to have. And my policy is always that honesty is the best policy and genuine concern. Right? If it is your child or your loved one, you are genuinely concerned about their welfare, and opening it up like that and saying, I've heard a lot about this drug fentanyl and I wanted to talk to you about it. I wanted to hear about if you're seeing, pills being handed out at parties and what you're observing. And I want to tell you about some of the dangers and how I worry about you, when you go to these parties, for example. But that genuine concern, not in a confrontational manner, not in a judgmental manner, but simply a safe space coming from love and concern.
There have been obviously losses out there for families that are very far-reaching. So for anyone who is watching this program who has been hit directly with a loss due to illicit fentanyl, talk to them, doctor. What would you say if they were there in your presence to at least, hopefully they're starting to heal, but to understand so that they can continue to heal? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, grief is very powerful. And I think it's really important that we allow families and communities the opportunity to grieve in the way that they grieve. It's a little bit different for everybody. And so certainly I would never want to tell somebody to, move on or try to get over it or, even push them into advocacy work around the subject because that may simply not be how they are choosing to grieve. And it is a process. I will mention that counseling services, individual therapy are available and can be very helpful for grief. There's also grief therapy, group therapies, and where you talk to other peers that maybe have suffered similar losses. So allowing everybody their individual lived experience with grief is really important.
Thank you. So, Lieutenant, therapy and education, key in all of this. We heard a little bit from the doctor about what they're doing to get into the schools and talk with the kids. What is law enforcement doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we take education very seriously. And, when we talk about fentanyl is a piece of this larger puzzle that we've been trying to solve for the last 20 years, which is the opioid epidemic. And so my office has been involved in our own way with trying to solve this opioid epidemic for quite a long time in the world of pharmaceutical diversion, prescription fraud, et cetera. That's kind of where we began. When we talk about education, we've kind of taken a three-pronged approach. We've tried to educate law enforcement, we've tried to educate the public, and we've tried to educate our community partners. So from the law enforcement side, what we have done is we have taken an introspective look and said, we believe that this is even a bigger problem than what it may appear. So what are we doing to ensure that we are accurately reporting things, investigating scenes correctly, and passing along the information that we need to pass along? So we have gone to extensive training to make sure that we handle investigations appropriately when we are called to them, and we're able to pass any appropriate information along to our partners. We have also gone out of our way to instruct various trainings to our partners throughout the metro area, throughout the region, in the world of pharmaceutical diversion, drug diversion, and now as we've gotten into fentanyl and overdose investigations. From the public side, as the doctor mentioned, I think getting out and speaking with the general public, families, is critical. Having those critical conversations with parents and making sure that they're aware of what their kids are doing, talking to schools, these things are very important. When it comes to some of our other citizen groups that we've dealt with, we've gone out and spoken with Nebraska Pharmacists Association, we've talked with Coalition RX. Anything that we can do to spread the message throughout the region, I think has been beneficial. That baseline knowledge, I think, and situational awareness from the community is going to be critical in helping reduce overdose deaths.
Okay. Is there anything that you haven't tried yet in terms of education that we may see down the road? Maybe it's an audience you haven't been able to reach. Maybe it's a platform you'd like to try. But is there something that you have been talking about that might, approach this thing a little bit differently? We're open to speaking to any groups out there that are willing to have us. I think there's always additional opportunities when it comes to schools. There are still colleges, high schools that we haven't gotten into and been able to talk about this problem. There's various clinics that we could get out and speak with additionally in the public. Any citizens group that might be interested, whether it's a local Kiwanis club, a Boy Scout group, anybody, we're willing to come out and speak with anybody in the community. Okay. So much unknown about this, right? You said it earlier, you don't know from one stop to the next. I would imagine we probably have some viewers out there now who are concerned because maybe not everything they have is a prescription drug. Maybe they're taking an allergy medication, for example. Alleviate some of those fears for such a broad topic, such a dangerous topic for the people who are watching.
Sure. I can alleviate some fears by letting the public know that if they have purchased a pill from a trusted source, such as their local pharmacy or over the counter at their store in a sealed container, the risks are very low. Generally, what we are talking about are drugs that are purchased illicitly or given to people outside of a sealed container on the street at a friend's house, wherever, out in public. Generally speaking, if you receive that product from your local pharmacy or purchased in a sealed container from a store, you should not have anything to worry about.
Okay, perfect. Talk to us about the importance of collaboration regarding something like illicit fentanyl.
You know, this is a very complex subject, and it's a very difficult problem to solve by yourself. So for law enforcement, we tend to look at these problems through a law enforcement viewpoint. Okay, so when it comes to the opioid epidemic in general, law enforcement tends to view that problem as a law enforcement problem. What we sometimes forget is that there are many disciplines out there that are also attacking the same problem. So it's a very, very wide scope of people that are attacking the same issue. So what we have gotten better about over the last several years are incorporating some various disciplines into our own effort to try to stop this, this overdose epidemic. So we have incorporated folks from healthcare, we've incorporated pharmacists, we've incorporated various citizen groups, and I think working together and collaborating is truly the only way that you can address a complicated and complex problem.
What have been the benefits? I mean, I'm hearing you say that, and I think that's fantastic because you're probably being introduced to folks you wouldn't have otherwise been introduced to, right? So there have to be obvious, you know, other than the obvious benefits, there has to be benefits to the State Patrol for that. What are those?
Well, I think networking, first and foremost, you know, even just from a law enforcement perspective, we have got some great law enforcement partners here in the metro area and across the state. The DEA and the FBI have been fantastic partners to the State Patrol for a long time. All of our allied local departments here in the metro area, the Omaha Police Department, Douglas County Sheriff's Office, Sarpy County Sheriff's Office, the list goes on and on. We are blessed with some great partners here in the Omaha metro area. So as we all work to attack this problem, we are forced to network. And the more that we network, the more we work together, the more we work together on other things. And there are many complicated and complex problems that we're dealing with outside of just the opioid epidemic. So when we start to work together on one and see some successes from that battle, we also work together on other things. In the community, a huge success that we have had is when it comes to education. You know, for law enforcement to push the one pill can kill mantra, for example, well, that's great, but that only reaches a certain segment of society. But now if we have healthcare workers saying the same thing, and we have pharmacists saying the same thing, and we have citizen groups out in schools saying the same thing, now we're exposing all the more people to that same message. And again, we have had some great partners from the public that we've worked with as well, and they have been great to work with. We've had some fantastic community outreach events with them, and I think it's helped us exponentially when it comes to dealing with this problem.
I'm glad that you're talking about outreach. This is a statewide program, so while the problem is more significant in Omaha and the Omaha area, I would imagine it's still a problem in other parts of the state.
Yes.
So when you talk about that collaborative piece, I would imagine that reach, but I won't assume, goes into those areas. And what are you seeing in terms of fentanyl in the parts of the state that we don't talk about all the time?
Sure. You know, this is a problem all the way across the state of Nebraska. Historically, we've always talked about Interstate 80 as the drug pipeline, correct? It stretches from coast to coast, and we've had people smuggle contraband across the interstate for as long as I've been with the patrol and even longer. So if you have a community anywhere across Nebraska that is anywhere close to I-80, which is basically the entire state of Nebraska, there is a good chance that this is in your community and that the adverse effects of this drug could be felt in your community.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask one more question before I go back to the doctor. You see this on a much more regular basis than the rest of us, right? So is there something that you want to share with our viewers that I have not asked you yet?
You know, I would just really stress to people that they need to have this conversation with their loved ones, friends and family members of the dangers that are inherent these days in regards to fentanyl being mixed into any pill or powder that does not come from a trusted source. They cannot be safe enough, in my opinion. We say it all the time, if you see something, say something, but I think that holds true in this case too. If you are concerned about the actions of a friend or a family member, remember there are Good Samaritan laws in the state of Nebraska, And I would encourage you to reach out to any trusted source, whether it's law enforcement or otherwise, and please try to get that person the help they need.
Okay, thank you very much. Doctor, I want to go back to you now in the final minutes that we have remaining, less than 3. Final thoughts from you and where you sit.
Yes, well, I'm really glad the lieutenant mentioned getting help, because that would be my #1 priority and something I would like for all Nebraskans to know. You know, of course, illicit fentanyl and illicit substances of all types are quite dangerous, but the majority of those who use illicit opioids actually began with a legitimate prescription, whether that was their prescription, whether it was the prescription of somebody else. And so it's important to know that you can still develop some problems even if you have a prescription from a trusted source. You can develop opioid misuse, you can develop an opioid use disorder, which then culminates with an addiction. What I'd like people to know is that help is available and recovery is possible and probable with the right treatment. We have amazing treatments for opioid use disorder that range from various medications, from outpatient treatment, from groups, from individual, from psychiatry. I mean, it really runs the gamut, and we have this available for Nebraskans. And the hardest part always is taking that first step. Taking that first step to seek help is the hardest part. There's different kinds of help, and they're all available. It's going to be unique to the individual. But what I would like to stress is that if you feel like you need help, or if you feel like there's something going on, or a loved one has something going on, please encourage them to get help, and please try to do so yourself. I know it's really hard, but I just want you to know that recovery is possible.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Along those lines, we are going to put up some information for our viewers. One of those is the Department of Psychiatry there with Dr. Balasanova. It's naturalhigh.org/fentanyl. That's where you saw the opening video. statepatrol.nebraska.gov 402-471-4545 and UNMC 402-552-6007. Lieutenant Kaufman, Dr. Balasanova, I want to thank you guys for joining us and for sharing such good information, and wish you very well moving forward.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.